The studio lights dim, and the world's laughter fades into a hush. In the silence, a woman sits at her dressing table, the iconic red hair glowing in the mirror's reflection. Lucille Ball, America's beloved clown, the queen of television, the woman who made the world fall in love with laughter, stares back at herself, her eyes shadowed with secrets. For decades, she was the heartbeat of American living rooms, the zany, lovable Lucy Ricardo. But behind the slapstick, behind the perfectly timed pratfalls and the infectious cackle, Lucille Ball lived a life that Hollywood's golden age tried desperately to keep hidden. Tonight, we pull back the velvet curtain. We step into the shadows of old Hollywood, where secrets were currency and reputations were guarded with iron fists. Here, in the hush of midnight corridors and behind the locked doors of dressing rooms, Lucille Ball's true story unfolded, a story of heartbreak, betrayal, and forbidden love. The world saw a woman who could turn a pie in the face into art. But those closest to her knew a different Lucy, passionate, fiercely intelligent, and drawn to men who saw her not as a punchline, but as a force of nature. It was an era when a single rumor could end a career overnight. The studio system was a fortress, with entire departments dedicated to burying scandal. Yet, even in this world of secrets, whispers about Lucy's private life persisted, whispers of affairs with men whose names would one day be etched in Hollywood's marble halls. For years, these stories were little more than rumors, protected by the loyalty of friends and the silence of those who owed their livelihoods to the Ball Arnaz empire. But time, as it always does, has loosened tongues. Private letters have surfaced. Memoirs, once locked away, have been published. And the last generation of Hollywood insiders, those who saw Lucy not as a legend, but as a woman, have begun to speak. The truth, as it emerges, is more complex and more human than any tabloid headline. Lucille Ball was not just a comedic genius. She was a woman of contradictions, vulnerable yet unbreakable, loyal yet restless, always searching for the connection that eluded her in the glare of the spotlight. "The public thinks they know my love story," she once confided to a friend. "They don't even know the half of it." Our journey begins in the 1930s, long before Lucy became a household name. The world was different then. Hollywood was a kingdom, and its stars were both royalty and prisoners. Lucille Ball, a contract player at RKO Studios, was still finding her place in this world. It was here, in the shadowy backlots and echoing sound stages, that she met Henry Fonda. Fonda was already a star, a man whose quiet dignity set him apart from the brashness of the industry. To the world, he was the embodiment of American decency. To Lucy, he was something more, a man who saw her not as a pretty face, but as an equal. Studio insiders would later whisper about the chemistry between them, a connection that was as intellectual as it was physical. Both were married, both aware of the risks. But in the stolen moments between takes, they found something rare: respect. A wardrobe assistant, her hands trembling as she recounted the memory decades later, remembered how Fonda would listen to Lucy's ideas, how he'd ask her opinion on scripts and scenes. "He made her feel seen," she said. "Not just looked at." In a world where actresses were often treated as ornaments, Fonda's attention was intoxicating. The affair, if it could be called that, was brief, a flicker of warmth in a cold industry. But it left a mark. For the rest of her life, Lucy would speak of Fonda with a softness reserved for only a few. Their friendship endured, long after the rumors faded. When Lucy struggled to build Desi Productions, it was Fonda who offered advice, who reminded her that she was more than just a performer. "Henry was a gentleman in every sense of the word," she would say, her eyes distant, her voice tinged with something like regret. It was the first of many times Lucy would be drawn to men who saw her mind, not just her beauty. But Hollywood is a place of shifting alliances and dangerous attractions. As the 1940s dawned, Lucy's path crossed with another legend, a man whose genius was matched only by his unpredictability. Orson Welles, the wunderkind of the Mercury Theatre, was a force of nature, a storm that swept through Hollywood, leaving chaos and inspiration in his wake. Lucy, ever the seeker, was drawn to his brilliance. Their lunches became the stuff of legend, long, intense conversations that left the studio buzzing. Welles was fascinated by Lucy's comedic instincts, her understanding of timing and physicality. He saw in her what others missed, a comic genius waiting to be unleashed. For Lucy, Welles was a revelation. He challenged her, pushed her, made her believe she could be more than the roles she was given. Desi Arnaz, Lucy's husband and partner, was not blind to the connection. Staff at Desilu would later recall the tension whenever Welles visited the lot. Desi, usually the life of the party, grew cold and suspicious. He was jealous, one receptionist remembered. It was the only time we ever saw him truly rattled. Welles, for his part, remained silent about the nature of their relationship. "Some connections are too meaningful to be reduced to gossip," he said, his eyes betraying nothing. But those who watched Lucy closely saw the change. After Wells, she was different, more assertive, more willing to challenge directors and producers. A script supervisor noted, it was like he awakened something in her. She started to believe she could run the show. And in time, she would. The affairs, if that's what they were more than just romantic dalliances. They were catalysts, moments of connection that shaped the woman Lucy would become. In the quiet after the laughter, in the spaces between the applause, Lucille Ball was searching for something more. And in the men who saw her true self, she found the courage to become a legend. As the first chapter of Lucy's secret life closes, we see her not as a caricature, but as a woman, complicated, yearning, and unafraid to reach for what she wanted, even when the world told her she couldn't. The stage is set for the next act, where passion and danger collide, and the stakes become higher than ever. The applause from the studio audience still echoes in the rafters, but backstage, the air is thick with tension. Lucille Ball, now the most recognizable woman in America, walks the fine line between public adoration and private longing. The world sees the perfect marriage, the laughter, the love. But behind closed doors, the cracks are beginning to show. It is the early 1950s, and I Love Lucy is a phenomenon. But fame, as Lucy would learn, is a double-edged sword. Desi Arnaz, her charismatic husband, is both her greatest ally and her deepest wound. His infidelities are an open secret in Hollywood, whispered about at parties and written between the lines of gossip columns. Lucy, ever the professional, keeps the pain hidden. But inside, she is unraveling. Enter Robert Mitchum, the quintessential bad boy, a man whose very presence radiates danger. Mitchum is everything Desi is not, silent, brooding, immune to the chaos of fame. They meet at industry events, their eyes finding each other across crowded rooms. For Lucy, the attraction is immediate and undeniable. Mitchum doesn't need to be the center of attention, he simply is. In his presence, Lucy feels seen, not as a star but as a woman. Hollywood historian Jeffrey Mark would later write, Mitchum projected a dangerous, smoldering quality that was so different from the public persona Lucy had crafted. For a woman who spent her days playing the silly, lovable housewife, the allure of danger was irresistible. The affair, if it happened, was brief, a stolen season of passion in a life otherwise scripted for public consumption. A production assistant who worked on both Desilu and Mitchum's films remembered the way they gravitated toward each other, the way Lucy's laughter changed when Mitchum was near. She needed to feel desirable, he said. And Mitchum made women feel that way. The relationship ended as quickly as it began, both stars too aware of the risks. For Lucy, the danger was not just to her reputation, but to the empire she and Desi had built. Yet, the impact lingered. Critics would later note a new sensuality in Lucy's performances, a confidence that hadn't been there before. A film scholar observed, there's a marked difference in how she carries herself in episodes from mid-1952 onwards, a subtle maturity, a knowing quality that makes her comedic performance even richer. Mitchum's niece would later reveal that her uncle kept a signed photo of Lucy in his private study, inscribed with the words, "Some storms are worth getting caught in." But the dangers of Hollywood were not always found in the shadows. Sometimes, they wore cowboy hats and walked with a swagger. John Wayne, the Duke himself, was the last man anyone expected to be linked with Lucille Ball. Yet, according to the unpublished memoirs of gossip columnist Hedda Hopper, Lucy and Wayne shared a brief, no-strings encounter during a period when both were between marriages. They met at charity events, film premieres, always surrounded by the glittering crowd. But for one weekend, according to a driver who worked for both, they found comfort in each other's company. It was never serious, he wrote in his private journal. Just a weekend that no one ever mentioned again. But there was genuine affection there. The two would remain friends for decades, their on-screen chemistry in later years hinting at a deeper familiarity. Wayne's son Patrick would later say, Dad had immense respect for Lucy as a businesswoman. He'd say she had bigger balls than most of the studio executives he dealt with. On the set of The Lucy Show, a photographer captured a moment between takes, Wayne whispering something in Lucy's ear, her laughter genuine, her hand squeezing his in a gesture that spoke of shared history. For Lucy, the attraction to Wayne was about more than romance. After years of Desi's emotional highs and lows, she craved calm, stability, a man who didn't need constant attention. I spent my days creating chaos for the camera, she once confided to her hairstylist. In my private life, I craved calm. In Wayne, she found a kindred spirit, hard-working, straightforward, immune to Hollywood's pretensions. But not all of Lucy's affairs were about passion or comfort. Some were about power. The most controversial of the rumored affairs involved an unnamed CBS executive, one of Desi's closest friends. According to Desilu staff, after years of enduring Desi's public betrayals, Lucy sought revenge in the only way Hollywood understood, by having an affair with someone who could give her leverage. A secretary who worked in the executive offices remembered, it wasn't about love. It was about leveling the playing field. The affair, if it happened, shifted the power dynamics in Lucy and Desi's relationship. Suddenly, Lucy's ideas were no longer dismissed in production meetings. She began to get everything she wanted from the network: budget increases, creative control, schedule preferences. "We all wondered what gave her such sudden leverage," a network secretary recalled. The ratings hadn't spiked, but Lucy was suddenly untouchable. Lucy's longtime personal assistant, in a private memoir, wrote, "The affair wasn't about passion. It was about power." Lucy was tired of being betrayed and humiliated. She told me, "Sometimes you have to speak to people in the only language they understand." It was a turning point, a moment when Lucy stopped suffering in silence and began to wield her own power. As the second act of Lucy's secret life draws to a close, we see a woman transformed by desire, betrayal, and the hard lessons of Hollywood. She is no longer just a star, but a survivor, someone who has learned to play the game on her own terms. The stage is set for the final chapter, where love and loss intertwine, and the true cost of a life lived in the spotlight is revealed. The years pass, and the laughter that once filled America's living rooms grows softer, more distant. Lucille Ball, now a legend, faces the twilight of her career with the same determination that made her a star. But fame, she knows, is fleeting. The world moves on, and even the brightest lights eventually dim. After her divorce from Desi Arnaz, Lucy remarries. Gary Morton, a comedian and producer, brings stability to her life, a quiet presence who manages her business affairs and shields her from the chaos of Hollywood. But even in this new chapter, Lucy's heart remains restless. The wounds of the past have not fully healed, and the longing for connection persists. It is during these years that the final rumored romance of Lucy's life unfolds, a relationship that, if true, speaks not of passion, but of understanding. Dena Martin, the king of cool, is himself adrift after his split from Jerry Lewis. Both he and Lucy are survivors, veterans of an industry that chews up and spits out even its brightest stars. They find solace in each other's company, their late-night conversations a refuge from the loneliness of fame. A neighbor in Beverly Hills remembers the sight of Martin's distinctive car parked outside Lucy's home, the quiet laughter that drifted through open windows. It wasn't about lust, the neighbor told a Hollywood historian. It was two survivors finding each other in the wreckage. On television, their chemistry is undeniable, a spark that hints at a deeper bond. Lucy's hairdresser would later say, "She lit up differently when Dean was around." It wasn't the giddy excitement of young love. It was the warm glow of finding someone who truly understands you. Neither Lucy nor Dean ever acknowledged a romantic relationship. But those who knew them best saw the tenderness in their interactions, the shorthand that comes from shared experience. Dean's daughter Dena would later write, "Dad had a special phone that only rang when certain people called. There weren't many who had that number, but Lucy was one of them. Sometimes he'd take those calls in private, which was unusual for him." For Lucy, the relationship with Dena Martin was a balm, a reminder that, even in the twilight of her life, she was still capable of connection, still worthy of love. Gary Morton, her husband, understood. "Lucy deserves all the happiness she can find," he once told a staff member. "God knows she's earned it." As the end approached, Lucy grew more reflective. In her final interview, just months before her death, she was asked about the rumors that had followed her for decades. She smiled, her eyes twinkling with mischief and wisdom. "The world got my talent," she said. "Only a select few got my heart." On April 26, 1989, Lucille Ball passed away, taking most of her secrets with her. The world mourned the loss of a legend, but those who knew her best mourned the woman. A woman who had loved deeply, suffered quietly, and fought for happiness on her own terms. Were the affairs real? The evidence, pieced together from letters, memoirs, and the memories of those who were there, suggests that Lucy found moments of connection outside her troubled marriage. Moments of respect, fidelity, and emotional stability that Desi could not or would not provide. But in the end, perhaps the details matter less than the truth they reveal. Behind the laughter, behind the legend, was a woman who refused to be defined by anyone else's script. Lucille Ball's story is not just one of scandal or heartbreak. It is the story of a woman who dared to live fully, to seek love and respect in a world that offered her only applause. She was complicated, passionate, and determined to find happiness, even if it meant breaking the rules. As the lights fade and the credits roll, we remember Lucy not just for the laughter she gave us, but for the courage it took to be herself. In the end, the most fascinating stories are the ones that happen when the cameras stop rolling.